Hi, I'm Chuck Woolery. Welcome to Season 3 of In Conversation. In this series, I talk to former directors of the United States Mint, retirement educators, and precious metals experts about subjects that affect you and your financial goals. So I hope you find our conversations educational and hopefully informative. We're going to talk about things that are just very important to your life. One is, what conflicts are the greatest threats to America right now? And that's a question on everybody's mind, I think. And what do you think?
One of them we hear so much from customers every day is around China and the sort of chess that China is playing on the global stage, whether it be relations with Russia or their posture towards Hong Kong or Taiwan, with their infrastructure builds across Africa and the like, and what that is likely to look like in the next 10, 20 years and really impact the global stage.
So, Angie, China has interesting leverage on us. We never talk about that, but there are little things that seem like little things, but there are lots and lots of little things where they have leverage over us. What are the things that they use against us?
Well, I don't think they use it against us. I think it's just fact.
Well, that they could.
Right? So they 8 out of every 10 medicines, including like chemotherapy, they make at least one ingredient for, right? So when the pandemic was happening, we had shortages on chemotherapy. If they're making the drugs for us, if they ever chose not to make that ingredient, would the U.S. be prepared or any other country to make their own chemotherapy drugs? Right now, the answer is no, not that I'm aware of. And so we have other products like that, not our basic needs, but other things like chips. They're made in Taiwan. For China, that would be very big for them if they were able to occupy Taiwan. It does two things, right? It gives them control over all the chips, which are advanced, all military chips, hospitals, servers, satellites. Every country's security at that time goes down because China has access to all that technology. And then their economy, which they need to boost anyway, right?
I keep hearing recently that China's in trouble. Their economy's starting to flatten out. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. And the question is this a temporary phase or is this a long-term decline? Something more like what happened to Japan in the 90s, which was called the lost decade, which became the lost 2 decades. I remember back in the 80s when there was talk about how the Japanese economy was going to dominate the world. It was growing so fast. And we've heard that same kind of talk around China. And now the Chinese currency is tanking. They are very busily working to prop it up through traditional currency manipulation means. And they're also trying to pump that economy, stimulate the economy, but the Chinese consumers are really not responding. So we're seeing China teeter on the brink of deflation, which is a far more difficult economic challenge.
Does that make them more dangerous or less dangerous?
Well, it makes them both. I mean, in one sense, less dangerous as an economy. They require less oil. They require less inputs for steel, for all kinds of manufacturing. As a result of the lower demand, it's taking inflationary pressure off the rest of the world. When they don't order as much oil prices decline. And we're actually seeing that today. We're seeing oil prices decline because the expectations for the Chinese economy have turned south. And oil has turned south along with that, despite the fact that we have all this uncertainty in the Middle East about oil supplies.
So let me ask Ed about staying on this subject with China and oil. Japan they had a problem with us because we stopped shipping raw products to them, like oil, gas, things like that. They really didn't have that commodity available to them, correct? Mm-hmm. Is China the same way? Do they not have oil on all that vast terrain they own?
Yeah, well, China does have oil, but the problem with their oil is it's not high quality oil like what you'd find in the Middle East. And so in order for China to continue growing, it needs more resources, which is why their strategy is to develop as many relationships with countries around the world so that they have a steady supply. It's just part of China's bigger plan. What most people miss about China's influence is that they're responding to, after World War I, it was an American century. America rose to power because they helped win that war, and they stayed in power through World War II and influenced the world. And China looks at that saying, you know what, it's our time. The American century is done, and the Chinese century will begin right now. And so their plan is to dominate the world like the United States has dominated the world.
So I want to pick up on this issue of whether or not the weakening Chinese economy makes China less of a threat or more of a threat to us. On the one hand, on the economic side, what I was talking about is they probably become less of a threat especially if this is a long-term decline in their economic power. However, authoritarian regimes like China often seek to deflect and distract domestic tensions away to international challenges and threats. And that's the danger with China right now on the international field, is that they will choose to distract the Chinese population from their economic plight with aggressive actions in the South China Sea, with Philippines, with Vietnam, or with Taiwan. And that's a highly dangerous situation.
I think you saw that a little bit even with COVID. We were already seeing the Chinese economy sputtering, and we were seeing the populations being pulled out of poverty in sort of a bifurcated way, right? Mm-hmm. There were a lot of folks being left behind, and that is terrible for a government that's trying to lift everybody up to a reasonable standard. And COVID came along, and that was a kind of convenient deflection, being able to shut everything down for, medical reasons, if you will, and be able to deflect some of that blame over there. So.
And one of the things that is really a huge challenge to the Chinese government right now is the residential real estate markets. There has been
they built all these cities that were empty.
They've overbuilt.
They've overbuilt by enormous amounts. It would take decades to occupy all these empty apartments and condominiums. And as a result, you have these it's hard for Americans to imagine how large these companies are that are going into default and dragging the Chinese economy down with it. And you have millions, and people in China buy houses differently than they do in the US. They pay for them up front and then they're built. And so you have all of these developers, big developers, who are headed south, going into default. And you have all these people who put hundreds of thousands of dollars into real estate and no house to go with it.
Wow.
You can imagine the political turmoil that could raise.
Well, you never hear about that, though. That's very interesting. I've never heard that before. I must say that everybody's kind of in agreement. Ed, you brought it up earlier at another time when we were talking, that the global catastrophe is just everywhere. It's in the Middle East, it's in Ukraine, it's in Russia, it's China, it's Taiwan.
And we haven't talked about immigration, the cartels. There's just a lot of global risk right now. And it's just not us. And it's not fear-mongering. When you talk to corporate CEOs and heads of global banks, they will all say this period that we're in has the greatest potential for destabilization in our lifetime.
Well, that's not encouraging, but Angie, you want to wrap this up for us?
Well, I'll say this, as far as China goes and our conflict with them, I think it's self-made. Like we made that happen by sending all of our supplies over there.
Yep. We helped them build their economy.
And they knew that the whole time. So them thinking they were taking over wasn't overnight. That was planned a long time ago with the aid of us, our decision-making, to allow the products that we sell to Americans to be made there, our medicines to be made there, what we need to survive to be made there, right?
Angie is exactly right. American corporations looked with greed on the Chinese market. This enormous market opportunity, and they said, we want a piece of that. We want a piece of that. And there was tremendous cost that went along with that in allowing access to our intellectual property, the Chinese stealing intellectual property, and getting away with it.
But it's just part of our country's nature to want to integrate, reach out, broaden. This is the whole idea behind free markets, is being able to trade freely between each other. And the hope is, because of that interaction, we'll develop friendships. They'll see democracy and freedom, and that'll be contagious, and that'll change the world. And it didn't happen.
Well, and it didn't happen. And
not to the extent that we were looking for, and now it's hurting us.
The theory is a good theory. We've seen this relationship build in Europe that created 70 years of peace in Europe after hundreds of years of slaughter. And they did that by removing barriers, increasing trade, and the like. China is different. And we did not approach it as if it was different. We were not appropriately cautious. The opening, Nixon's opening to China, I think was a good move. But the way we've managed that, as Angie was talking about, has been very weak. We let them get away with murder.
Yeah, it's been a one-way street, almost.
Everything should be done in moderation, which is why you see Intel talking about whether or not they're going to take over Department of Defense chips. Right? Because we know we got to bring some of that back, especially our security and the things that matter most to health and families. And so when that came out, it did not surprise me. I'm hoping they've been working on it much longer than the report that came out, because we need to bring some of it back home.
And bringing it back is proving to be difficult. Just a few miles north of my house, TSMC, which is the largest chip manufacturer in Taiwan, has been building a plant. And that has now been delayed a couple more years because we just don't have the know how to even build it. They're bringing in more workers to build it. And so it's been set back by quite a bit.
So I think that you're seeing people acquire gold, right? Because when you have one place taking over power, and what will the US dollar do? What will other currencies do? But will gold and silver always stand? Yes. So when there's an unknown, we collect an asset that helps us through the unknown, right? So I think that's kind of how I would wrap it up. Chuck.
And that does it for me too. And I'll tell you, China is kind of like trying to tame a honey badger. It's just not going to work for us. Thanks for watching, everybody, in Conversation. I'm Chuck Woolery. We'll see you next time.
If you would like to learn more about why physical gold should be an important part of your portfolio, simply request the Complete Guide to Buying Gold, which will provide you with important, never-seen-before facts and information you should know about making gold, silver, and platinum purchases.
I'm Chuck Woolery. Thanks a lot for watching In Conversation.